Dorothy Whitfield sat on the porch swing of her weathered Kentucky farmhouse, her hands folded neatly in her lap, watching the gravel road shimmer in the summer heat. The cicadas screamed from the oak trees, and the faint scent of honeysuckle drifted in on the breeze. This was the house she had lived in for 42 years. This was the house she and her late husband, Robert, had built with their own hands, board by board, nail by nail. The porch creaked the same way it always had. The white paint chipped where Robert had once promised to repaint, but never got the chance. Dorothy's eyes lingered on the barn at the far end of the property, now sagging with age, but still sturdy enough to remind her of long nights when Robert had stumbled in, smelling of bourbon and hay. It was a home with memories both tender and bitter, but it was hers, at least, she thought it was. Her son, Gregory, and his wife, Denise, had been circling around the property like buzzards for the better part of 2 years. They told her she was getting too old, that she didn't need all this space anymore. They told her it wasn't safe for her to be alone on 10 acres of land. Dorothy, who still mowed her lawn with a stubborn pride and baked pies every Sunday for the church potluck, knew exactly what they wanted: the house, the land, the money that would come when it was sold. Gregory had come by the previous week, briefcase in hand, his tie too tight for the Kentucky summer. He had pushed papers across the dining table and told her, in that tone he always used when he thought he was the smartest man in the room, that she should consider transferring ownership. Dorothy hadn't even looked at the papers before she pushed them back. "This house isn't just lumber and nails, Gregory," she told him, her voice steady. "This house is my life." Denise, ever the sly one, had smiled thinly. "Mama Dorothy, no one's saying it isn't special, but you can't live out here forever. We could take care of it for you. You'd be better off in one of those retirement communities. They've got game nights and nurses on call. Don't you want to relax?" Relax. Dorothy nearly laughed out loud at the word. To her, the quiet porch swing at dusk, the smell of her roses blooming along the fence, and the clatter of the old screen door, that was relaxation. Being herded into some community with bingo cards and strangers, that was prison. But then came the sentence that stuck with her like a thorn. "We don't need you anymore, Mama Dorothy. We just need the house." They hadn't even flinched when they said it. Gregory said it like a fact. Denise nodded along, and then they both stood up, gathered their things, and left as if they'd just finished a business meeting. Dorothy sat at the table for hours afterward, staring at the wood grain, Robert's old coffee ring still faintly visible near the corner. Her chest ached, not from age but from betrayal. She had raised Gregory to respect the land and to cherish the value of family, and now, here he was, treating her like she was nothing but a legal obstacle to be signed away. That night, Dorothy couldn't sleep. She paced the hallways of the farmhouse, her slippers whispering against the floorboards. The pictures on the wall seemed to watch her. Gregory, as a boy holding a fishing pole, Robert grinning with his arm around her waist, and Christmas mornings filled with laughter. All those memories under this roof. Did her own son really want to erase them? The next morning, she went to the drawer by the kitchen sink, the one where Robert used to keep spare nails, a screwdriver, and old receipts. Beneath the clutter, she found what she was looking for: the brass keyring to the farmhouse. The keys were heavy in her hand, cold and solid, and she realized she hadn't touched them in months. She rarely locked her doors out here, but now she felt an urge to clutch them, to remind herself that as long as she held the keys, she still held her independence. Later that day, when Gregory returned, this time without Denise but with more papers, Dorothy met him on the porch. He started his speech again, talking about opportunity and practicality, but Dorothy cut him off. "Gregory," she said, standing taller than she had in years, "you can stop bringing these papers. You can stop bringing your wife's sweet little smiles, because I know what you want, and you'll never get it as long as I'm alive." Gregory's jaw tightened. "Mama, don't be stubborn. This isn't about you anymore. We're thinking about the future." Dorothy held up the keys and let them jingle in the hot afternoon air. "This house is the future. And as long as these keys are in my hand, it's mine." Her son stared at her, stunned. For a moment, Dorothy saw a flicker of the boy he once was, the boy who had played hide-and-seek in the hayloft, the boy who had cried when he fell from the apple tree. But then his eyes hardened. Without a word, he turned and walked down the porch steps, his shoes crunching the gravel as he disappeared down the road. Dorothy stayed there on the swing long after he left, the keys heavy in her palm. She knew the battle had just begun. The following week passed in tense silence. Dorothy kept the keys in her apron pocket, always within reach. a constant reminder that this house was hers. She went about her routines, watering the roses in the morning, feeding the chickens, folding laundry on the porch rail, but every task felt heavier now, shadowed by the words Gregory had left behind. "We don't need you anymore." That sentence replayed in her head when she boiled her morning coffee, when she knelt by Robert's grave at the back of the property, and when she lay down to sleep in the four-poster bed she and Robert had shared for decades. The betrayal stung sharper than any arthritis pain. It wasn't just about the house. It was about her place in her own family. On Thursday afternoon, Dorothy heard the crunch of tires on the gravel road. A black SUV rolled up the drive. Out stepped Denise, sunglasses perched on her head, her manicured nails glinting in the sunlight. She wasn't carrying papers this time. She was carrying boxes. Dorothy met her at the porch, arms folded. "What are you doing with those?" Dorothy asked. Her voice, even Denise, offered a polite smile, but her eyes were sharp. "Gregory and I thought it would be easier if I helped you start packing some things. That way, when the time comes, it won't feel so overwhelming." Dorothy didn't move an inch. "The time isn't coming, Denise, not while I'm breathing." Denise's smile faltered, but she pressed on. "You've got to be realistic. You can't manage this place alone forever. What happens when something breaks? When did you fall?" Gregory and I, well, we're just trying to think ahead. For everyone's sake. Dorothy's gaze shifted to the boxers. She thought of all the things inside the house that couldn't fit neatly into cardboard. Robert's laughter echoing off the kitchen walls, the smell of Sunday dinners wafting through the hall, and the sound of Gregory's small footsteps racing down the stairs when he was a boy. These walls weren't just wood, they were memory. And she wasn't about to let Denise box them up like leftovers. "Take those boxes back to your car," Dorothy said. "This house isn't leaving my hands, and neither is this land." Denise's expression hardened. She set the boxers on the porch, crossed her arms, and leaned in. "You're making this difficult, Mama Dorothy. You think this is strength, but it's selfishness. Gregory's the one who's going to inherit everything anyway. Why not make it easier for everyone?" Dorothy's temper flared, but she kept her tone steady. "Gregory may be my son, but inheritance is earned by love, not taken by greed. And if you think I am going to hand this house over while I am still alive, you're sorely mistaken." For a long moment, they stared at each other, the old woman with her weathered face and determined eyes, the younger woman with her polished veneer and unyielding ambition. Finally, Denise bent down, snatched the boxers off the porch, and stormed back to the SUV. Before climbing in, she turned and said coldly, "You can hold on to those keys all you want. It won't change what's coming." The car sped off, leaving a cloud of dust in its wake. Dorothy stood alone on the porch, the cicadas humming their endless chorus. Her knees ached, her heart ached worse, but her grip on the keys never loosened. That night, Dorothy sat at her oak dining table with a glass of sweet tea. She pulled out the old family Bible, the one Robert had always kept near the hearth, its leather cover cracked with age. Inside the back cover, where pages had yellowed over time, Robert had scribbled a note years ago in his strong handwriting. "This land belongs to Dorothy. May it always stay in her hands until she decides otherwise." Her throat tightened. She traced the words with her finger. It wasn't just sentiment, it was protection. The next morning, she made an appointment with her attorney, Mr. Halbrook, an old friend of Robert's who had drawn up their will years ago. She took the bus into town, clutching the keys in one hand and the Bible in the other. When she arrived, she explained everything: Gregory's push for papers, Denise's boxes, and their cruel words. Mr. Halbrook listened patiently, adjusting his glasses as she spoke. Finally, he nodded. "Dorothy, you're still of sound mind. That means you have the right to decide what happens to your property. If you want, we can strengthen the will. Make sure there's no confusion, and we can add a clause. No sale of the house can happen without your consent while you're alive." Dorothy felt relief wash over her. "That's exactly what I want. They can wait until I'm gone. But as long as I'm here, this is my home." He drafted the documents, and Dorothy signed them with a steady hand. As the pen scratched across the paper, she felt something unshakable rise within hers, something she hadn't felt in years. Power. When she returned home, she tucked a legal folder into the drawer beneath the keys. It was her insurance, her shield. The weekend came, and Gregory returned. This time, he didn't bother with pleasantries. He walked in, his tie loosened, frustration written all over his face. "Mama, we can't keep doing this. You're being unreasonable." Dorothy stood in the kitchen, flour on her hands, from rolling biscuits. Unreasonable is asking a mother to give up her home while she's still alive. You should be ashamed. Gregory slammed his hand on the counter, rattling the flour tin. You're forcing my hand. Don't make me get the courts involved. Dorothy calmly wiped her hands on her apron, reached into the drawer, and pulled out the folder. She placed it on the counter and slid it toward him. You want to take me to court? She asked. Read that first. Gregory opened the folder, his eyes scanning the updated will and legal protections. His face paled. You really went to Holbrook. I did, Dorothy said firmly. And as long as I'm alive, you can't touch this house. Not one nail, not one floorboard. You and your wife may think you don't need me anymore, but let me make this clear. I don't need either of you to survive. The silence that followed was thick, broken only by the ticking of the old kitchen clock. For the first time, Gregory had no words. He snapped the folder shut, shoved it back toward her, and stormed out, slamming the screen door so hard the hinges rattled. Dorothy exhaled slowly, the sound almost like a prayer. She knew this wasn't the end, but she had won this round. And deep down, she was ready for the battles yet to come. The days after Gregory's outburst settled into a strange quiet. Dorothy noticed he hadn't returned her calls, not even a courtesy check-in. Denise, too, stayed away, though Dorothy spotted their SUV parked at the end of the gravel road once or twice, as if they were keeping an eye on her from a distance. But Dorothy refused to let fear take root. She kept herself busy with chores. She patched the chicken coop where a raccoon had clawed through, canned the last of the garden tomatoes, and sat out on the porch in the evenings, sipping tea while the summer crickets sang. Each small act reminded her that she was still capable, still in control. One evening, while she was dozing lightly on the porch swing, she was startled awake by footsteps crunching across the gravel. Gregory stood at the base of the porch, his hands jammed into his pockets. His tie was loosened, his eyes weary but still carrying that same sharp edge. Can we talk, Mama? He asked, his voice softer than before. Dorothy sat upright, wary. Talking doesn't work if you're only here to take, Gregory. He exhaled and lowered himself onto the porch step. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then he finally muttered, You embarrassed me the other day, bringing in Holbrook, making me look like the greedy one. Dorothy's voice was calm, but firm. You made yourself look greedy. I just showed you the truth. Gregory rubbed his face. You don't understand. Denise has been on me about this house for months. She says we could sell it, put the money toward our future. It's hard living between what she wants and what you want. Dorothy's lips tightened. Then maybe you need to ask yourself what you want. Do you want to honor your father's memory? Or do you want to be remembered as the son who put his mother out of her own home? Her words hung heavy in the humid air. Gregory didn't answer. He stood abruptly, muttered something about being late for a meeting, and walked back to the car. Dorothy watched the taillights disappear into the night, her chest heavy. The following week, Dorothy received a letter in the mail. It was from a real estate company in Lexington, with a glossy brochure about senior relocation services. She frowned, flipping through it. The letterhead bore Denise's handwriting. Just something to consider. Mama Dorothy. Dorothy chuckled dryly. Consider this, not in 1,000 years. She tossed the brochure into the fireplace and let it burn. But she knew the pressure was far from over. A few days later, she was at church, sitting in her regular pew beneath the stained glass, when Pastor Allen approached her afterward. His brow was furrowed. Dorothy, he said carefully, Gregory and Denise came by my office this week. They said they're worried about you living out here alone. They asked if I might encourage you to think about downsizing. Dorothy's mouth fell open. They brought you into this. Pastor Allen shifted uncomfortably. I told them I'd talk to you, but I also told them you've always been strong-willed still. I have to ask, are you safe out there on your own? Dorothy's back straightened. Pastor, I've been safe in that house longer than Denise has been alive. My Robert built those walls strong enough to withstand storms. And I'll not abandon them because someone thinks I'm too old. The pastor nodded, a small smile tugging at his lips. That's what I figured you'd say. But you should know they're not giving up. Dorothy left the church that morning with her chin high. If Gregory and Denise thought they could corner her by using community sympathy, they had underestimated her resolve. That evening, she sat at the kitchen table and pulled out her journal. In careful, steady handwriting, she wrote a letter addressed not to Gregory, but to her grandchildren. She poured out her heart about the farm, the history of the land, the love she and Robert had poured into it. She wrote of the summer cookouts, the winters by the fireplace, the smell of honeysuckle that carried across the porch in June. She ended with a promise. This home will be here for you, so long as I have breath. Do not let anyone take it from you before it's time. She folded the letter, placed it in an envelope, and tucked it into the family Bible alongside Robert's old note. That way, no matter what Gregory tried, the grandchildren would know the truth. The next confrontation came sooner than expected. On a muggy Wednesday, Dorothy heard a commotion outside. She opened the door to find Denise unloading men from a moving truck. They carried boxes, tape, even rolls of bubble wrap. Dorothy's heart pounded. "What is the meaning of this?" she demanded. Denise's voice was sharp. "We're helping you pack. You're not listening, so we're taking matters into our own hands." Dorothy marched down the steps, planting herself between the workers and her front door. "Not one of you is setting foot inside this house. This is trespassing." The workers hesitated, glancing at each other. Denise rolled her eyes. "Ignore her. She doesn't know what's best for her." Dorothy's eyes blazed. She pulled out her phone, dialed the sheriff's office, and spoke loudly enough for everyone to hear. "Yes, Sheriff, this is Dorothy Whitfield. I've got people trying to force their way into my home. I'll need an officer out here." At the word sheriff, the workers froze. Denise's face flushed red. "You're making a scene," she hissed. Dorothy lifted the keys from her apron and held them up high. "This house is mine. And if you think you can take it while I'm still standing, you'll have to drag me out first." The workers began shuffling back toward the truck. Denise cursed under her breath, glaring at Dorothy like a rattlesnake ready to strike. Finally, she barked at the men to load everything back up. When the truck pulled away, Denise stood at the bottom of the steps, seething. "You think this is over? You're only delaying the inevitable." Dorothy met her gaze, unflinching. "Maybe, but every delay is a victory, and I'll fight for every last one." That night, Dorothy sat on her porch with the keys clutched in her hand, the cicadas humming like they always had. She thought of Robert's note, of her letter to the grandchildren, of the updated will. They could throw papers and threats and moving trucks at her, but they couldn't shake her spirit. And for the first time in weeks, she felt something close to peace, because she knew one thing for certain. She wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. She was fighting for the generations that came after. The next morning, Dorothy woke to the sound of gravel crunching under tires. She peeked out the window, her stomach tightening when she saw a sleek black sedan she didn't recognize. A man in a suit stepped out, briefcase in hand, his shoes far too polished for a Kentucky farm road. Dorothy had lived long enough to know trouble when she saw it. She smoothed her apron, straightened her back, and met the stranger at the porch. "Mrs. Whitfield?" he asked, offering a thin smile. "Yes," Dorothy said, eyeing the papers in his hand. "My name is Mr. Collins. I represent your son and his wife. I have here a petition requesting transfer of ownership of this property, citing concerns for your well-being and financial stability." Dorothy's chest tightened, but she kept her voice steady. "So they've hired a lawyer now?" Collins gave a half shrug. "They believe it's in everyone's best interest if you sign. It would allow for a smoother transition into assisted living, while ensuring the property is sold at market value." Dorothy's jaw set. "And what if I don't sign?" Collins adjusted his tie. "Then your son may pursue guardianship proceedings, claiming you're no longer able to manage your affairs." Dorothy's heart pounded, but she refused to let him see fear. She held out her hand. "Let me see those papers." He passed them over. Dorothy didn't bother reading beyond the first line. She carried them to the porch rocker, sat down, and slowly tore the pages into strips, letting them fall like confetti at her feet. Colin's face reddened. "Mrs. Whitfield, this is a serious legal document," Dorothy cut him off. "And this is my house. You tell my son if he wants to drag his mama into court, then he better be prepared to explain to a judge why she's still paying her bills, cooking her meals, and fixing her chicken coop." For a moment, Collins stood frozen, briefcase dangling at his side. Then he turned stiffly, muttering something about further action, and marched back to his car. Dorothy watched him drive off before gathering the shredded paper into a small pile. She struck a match, lit the scraps, and watched them burn. That evening, she called Mr. Halbrook again. The lawyer sounded unsurprised. "I thought it might come to this," he said. "They're trying to set up a case that you're incompetent. But I've reviewed your financials, and there's nothing to support that claim. If they push it, we'll push back harder." Dorothy smiled faintly. That's what I like to hear. Still, the pressure only grew. Denise began calling members of the church choir, telling them Dorothy was becoming forgetful and unsafe on her own. Gregory even arranged a meeting with a county social worker, claiming concern for his mother's health. Dorothy found out when the social worker showed up unannounced one Friday morning. "Mrs. Whitfield," the young woman said gently, clipboard in hand, "we've received reports about possible neglect or inability to care for yourself. Would you mind if I asked you a few questions?" Dorothy's eyes flashed. "Neglect? The only neglect around here is my son neglecting his manners." Still, she invited the woman in, brewed a pot of coffee, and answered every question with crisp detail. She showed her the tidy pantry, the neat stack of bills paid on time, the fresh jars of jam cooling on the counter. By the time the social worker left, she was smiling. "Frankly, Mrs. Whitfield, you're in better shape than half the families I visit. I'll be closing this case immediately." Dorothy chuckled as she watched the woman's car roll away. Nice try, Gregory. But she knew her son wasn't finished. A week later, a notice arrived in the mail. Gregory and Denise had filed an official petition for guardianship, claiming Dorothy was no longer capable of managing her affairs. A court date was set. Dorothy sat at the kitchen table with the paper in her hand, anger and sadness washing over her in waves. Her child, the boy she had raised with love and sacrifice, was trying to declare her unfit. That night, she dreamed of Robert. In the dream, he was young again, standing tall in his overalls, hammer in hand, as he built the very porch she sat on now. He looked at her and said, "Hold firm, Dorothy. This house has stood storms before, and it'll stand this one too." When she woke, she knew what she had to do. She called Halbrook. "We'll fight them in court," she said firmly. Halbrook agreed, and together they began gathering evidence. Bank statements, medical reports, letters from neighbors attesting to Dorothy's sharpness and independence. Even Pastor Allen, who had been caught in the middle, agreed to testify on her behalf after seeing how far Gregory and Denise had pushed things. The trial loomed large in Dorothy's mind, but she carried herself with quiet dignity. Neighbors rallied around her, dropping off casseroles and sitting on the porch with her, telling her stories of Robert and the farm. One evening, her granddaughter Emma biked up the gravel path, cheeks flushed from the ride. She burst through the door, wrapped her arms around Dorothy, and whispered, "Don't let them take the house, Grandma. This place is my whole childhood." Dorothy hugged her tight. "I won't, sweetheart. I promise you I won't." On the day of the hearing, Dorothy dressed in her Sunday best, a simple navy dress with Robert's old pocket watch pinned inside the lapel. She walked into the courthouse with her cane, tapping the floor, chin high, eyes bright. Gregory and Denise were already there, seated with their lawyer. Denise's smirk faltered when she saw Dorothy stride in, as steady as a mountain oak. The judge, a silver-haired woman with sharp eyes, began the proceedings. Gregory's lawyer painted a picture of a frail, confused old woman in need of supervision. But when Dorothy took the stand, she spoke with clarity and strength, answering every question without hesitation. She recited her monthly expenses from memory, described the details of her garden harvest, even quoted a verse from the Psalms that had guided her since girlhood. The courtroom grew silent as she spoke. At the end, she looked directly at Gregory. "I may be old, but I am not weak. I raised you to know better than this. And if you think you can declare me incompetent just to take my home, then you've forgotten who I am." The judge leaned forward, her expression firm. "I've heard enough. Petition denied. Mrs. Whitfield is clearly of sound mind and capable of managing her affairs." Dorothy exhaled, relief flooding through her. Gregory's shoulders slumped. Denise's face burned red, and Halbrook gave her a proud nod. As Dorothy walked out of the courtroom, the keys jingled softly in her apron pocket. Each step felt lighter, stronger, as though Robert himself walked beside her. But deep down, she knew one thing: this battle might be over. But the war for her home wasn't finished yet. Gregory didn't speak to Dorothy after the hearing. He couldn't. His pride was wounded too deeply. The image of his mother, sharp, fearless, commanding respect from the entire courtroom, burned in his mind. Denise, on the other hand, refused to let go. "They humiliated us in there," she hissed as they drove home. "We had the judge, the lawyer, everything lined up, and she still made fools out of us." Gregory's hands tightened around the steering wheel. "What do you want me to do, Denise? She won." "No," Denise snapped. "She won this round, but we'll make her life so miserable she won't want to stay there. We'll bleed her out until she has no choice. And so they began their next campaign, not through lawyers, but through whispers and Prussia. Dorothy noticed it first at the church picnic. Longtime friends averted their eyes, and conversations hushed when she passed. Denise had been busy spinning her tale of a stubborn old woman who refused to do the sensible thing, painting herself and Gregory as dutiful children burdened by an uncooperative mother. Dorothy carried her head high, refusing to show the sting she felt, but when Mrs. Larkin from the quilting circle plucked her tongue and muttered, "So sad, Dorothy just can't accept help," it lodged deep in her chest. That night, sitting on the porch, she sighed heavily. "Lord, I can handle lawsuits, lawyers, even Gregory's betrayal, but gossip from folks I've broken bread with, that cuts deep." Mr. Halbrook visited 2 days later, bringing fresh news. "I've had 3 calls this week from neighbors asking if you were being reckless with your health. Denise is stirring the pot. She's hoping to wear you down with shame and isolation." Dorothy's eyes narrowed. "She underestimates me." Still, she couldn't deny the loneliness that crept in. It was Emma who saved her from sinking. The girl began visiting nearly every day, helping with chores, reading aloud from her school books, or simply sitting quietly as Dorothy canned tomatoes. One afternoon, Emma asked, "Grandma, can I record you telling stories about the farm, for school, but also, just so we don't lose them?" Dorothy's eyes softened. "You think anyone would care to hear an old woman ramble?" "I do," Emma said firmly, "and someday, others will too." So, Dorothy began recording. She spoke of Robert and their early years, of winters when the pipes froze, of summers when the corn stood taller than Gregory himself at 12 years old. Emma uploaded the videos to a small community channel, and to their surprise, people started watching. Comments poured in. "My grandmother used to tell the same stories. This reminds me of the farm I grew up on. Dorothy, you've got more sense than any of us young ones combined." For every whisper Denise spread in town, Dorothy's voice carried farther online, reaching strangers who admired her grit. But Gregory and Denise weren't done. Late one night, Dorothy woke to the sound of footsteps outside. Heart hammering, she grabbed the flashlight and peered through the curtains. Tire tracks scored the gravel, fresh footprints led to the barn. She slipped on her boots, cane in one hand, light in the other, and pushed open the barn door. The stench of gasoline hit her nose. A red canister sat, tipped on its side, liquid pooling dangerously near the hay bales. Dorothy's breath caught, and then she saw it, matches scattered on the dirt, as though someone had been spooked before finishing the job. Her knees wobbled, but she steadied herself. If she had come out a few minutes later, her barn and maybe her whole house could have gone up in flames. The sheriff came, took photos, and shook his head. "Looks like an arson attempt. Do you have any enemies, Mrs. Whitfield?" Dorothy gave him a long, level look. "Just family." He frowned but didn't press. The next day, Emma sat with Dorothy on the porch, eyes wide with fear. "Grandma, what if they try again?" Dorothy clasped her hand. "Sweetheart, I've lived through storms, blackouts, and the loss of your granddaddy. I won't let a can of gasoline chase me out of my home." But deep inside, Dorothy knew the danger was escalating. Gregory and Denise were slipping from greed into recklessness. They had already failed in court, failed in reputation, and now they were willing to risk crimes just to break her spirit. She wouldn't wait for them to strike again. Dorothy began planning her final stand. She gathered her evidence, every threat, every false claim, every attempt at sabotage. She spoke with Halbrook about countersuing, not just defending. And she called Emma close one evening and said, "If I fall, you carry this fight. Don't let them win." Emma's eyes burned. "You're not falling, Grandma. You're winning." The battle lines were drawn. Dorothy knew the next confrontation would either break her or finish Gregory and Denise for good. The barn incident left a permanent edge to Dorothy's nights. Every creak in the floorboards, every gust of wind against the shutters made her ears sharpen. But rather than retreat, she grew more resolute. "This ends with me," she told Mr. Halbrook firmly as they spread papers across her dining table. "I am not leaving this mess for Emma to clean up after I am gone." Halbrook leaned back in his chair. "Then we go on the offense. They've harassed you, attempted fraud, and now there's evidence of arson. If the sheriff ties it back to them, we can bury them in charges." Dorothy gave a grim smile. "Let's not just bury them. Let's make sure they can't claw their way out again." Gregory and Denise, meanwhile, were unraveling. Bills are stacked on the kitchen counter. Their mortgage had fallen behind. Denise's shopping sprees had left their accounts bare. Gregory's hours at work had been cut, and every time he saw his mother's face on Emma's YouTube channel, his anger boiled hotter. "She's turning people against us," Denise fumed, scrolling through hundreds of comments praising Dorothy's wisdom. "Look, 10,000 views. Who even cares about canning tomatoes and plowing fields?" "Everybody but us," Gregory muttered, slamming his beer down. "She's got strangers cheering her on while we retreated like villains in our town." "Then maybe it's time we stop playing nice," Denise said darkly. Gregory looked at her, startled. "We tried fire, and that backfired. What are you suggesting?" She leaned in. "If she won't hand over that house, then we'll find another way to make her irrelevant." But Dorothy wasn't waiting. The following week, she invited the sheriff, Halbrook, and a few trusted neighbors over. Emma filmed quietly in the corner as Dorothy, cane in hand, stood before them like a general addressing her troops. "I've been painted as stubborn, as weak, as a burden, but let me remind everyone here this land was built by my hands and Robert S. hands before me. It is mine until my last breath, and I will not be bullied out of it." She held up a folder thick with evidence, photographs, written threats, the sheriff's report on the gasoline. "I have all I need to bring charges, but I want more than punishment. I want protection, for myself, for Emma, for what Robert and I built." The sheriff nodded slowly. "Mrs. Whitfield, if you're ready to press charges, I'll personally see this through. No one gets away with threatening to burn you out of your home." And so the wheels turned. Gregory and Denise were summoned, their faces pale as they stepped into the county courthouse once more. But this time, they weren't the plaintiffs. They were the accused. Arson, harassment, fraud. The list was long. The evidence, undeniable. Dorothy sat in the front row, Emma's hand clasped tightly in hers, as the judge read out the charges. Gregory tried to meet his mother's eyes, but she never flinched. Denise whispered frantically to her lawyer, but even he shook his head. There was no winning this case. When the verdict came, it was swift. Gregory and Denise were ordered to stay away from Dorothy's property, barred from contacting her directly, and held financially liable for damages and legal costs. Dorothy exhaled, her chest light for the first time in months. She had done it. The farm grew quiet again after that. Too quiet at first. Dorothy half expected to wake to another threat, another scheme, but instead, she found peace settling back into the walls. Her porch became lively again, filled with neighbors who returned after realizing the lies Denise had spread. The quilting circle invited her back, and she went, chin high. Emma kept uploading her stories, and the little channel swelled into something bigger. People writing from across the country to say how much Dorothy inspired them. One evening, as the sun sank golden over the cornfields, Emma asked, "Grandma, do you ever regret it? Fighting so hard?" Dorothy smiled faintly. "No, sweetheart. I regret trusting the wrong people, but I don't regret standing my ground. Sometimes you have to remind even your kin that strength doesn't vanish with age." Emma squeezed her hand. "You're stronger than anyone I know." Dorothy gazed out at the horizon. The same view she had shared with Robert decades earlier. The land, the house, the memories, they were still hers. Her story would not be written as a tragedy of betrayal. It would be remembered as a triumph of resilience. And as the cicadas sang in the Kentucky twilight, Dorothy whispered to herself, "I held the keys. I always did."